Who wants to go first? Guillermo, do you wanna say hi?
Well, any of you can go first.
You go for it.
Okay, hi. This is Guillermo, and I'm very happy to be here and join the meeting. We are going to do a very short presentation of all of us, so you can have a feeling of who we are and why we are here and what's our background. My name is Guillermo, and I studied telecommunications engineering in Madrid. And I also did my PhD in biomedical engineering, and then I moved to Montreal to the MNI to do a postdoc with Sylvain Vallet, and I mainly work with MEG and EEG. So I have the chance to work on the MEG extension of the BIDS, and it was very encouraging that this finally went out very well with a very good community effort. So many other electrophysiological extensions could follow up, and like EEG and intracranial EEG come afterwards. And well, I work on the Open MEG archive, Omega, which is an open MEG repository where MEG data can be collected and distributed and shared. So I think that's when I first discovered the BIDS, because we were planning to do some kind of data organization scheme very similar to the BIDS, and then we discovered the BIDS and said, we are not going to reinvent the wheel, so why don't we extend this extension for MEG? So that's how it went, and I'm very happy that everything is going so well in the community.
Awesome. Melanie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my background is a master's in physics and then a PhD in computer science, but where I've done all kinds of medical imaging, different modalities. And then I did a postdoc at the Martinez Center for Biomedical Imaging in Boston, and then returned in 2014 to be at the National Hospital here in Denmark. And nowadays I work mostly with MRI, but I actually have the last 4 to 5 years mostly worked with PET. And I came into BIDS because I met Chris Korgulevsky at the NeuroHack Week in Seattle. It was 2017. And he was trying to think of extending BIDS to PET, but hadn't as much experience with PET. So I ended up taking over from him. And we're basically almost finished with the PET extension. We're in the process of finishing the last bits and are trying to get a paper published soon, and also hopefully have a pull request, but we have some issues with finding someone to do a validator. So hey, any community people out there, they're good in JavaScript, write me a message. And that's basically how I got involved.
Robert, do you want to go next?
Okay, so I'm Robert Oostenveld. I'm MEG physicist at the Donders Institute in Nijmegen. I've been doing MEG for close to 20 years. My background is in physics. I worked for a short time at the MEG Center in Münster in Germany. And after doing my PhD here in Nijmegen, I had a postdoc position in Aalborg in the north of Denmark. And the last few years, off and on, I've been also part-time working at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. I've been sharing open source code for a long time, first through EEG Lab and later through Fieldtrip, which is like our own toolbox. And it's when we started discussing data with other toolbox developers, such as MNE Python, Brainstorm, EEG Lab, that's where we identified that BIDS would be a great step forward also for the MEG and also for the EEG community. And so since then, so since 4 years or so, I've been involved in the electrophysiology extension of BIDS. And that's what I plan to keep doing. And I'm really looking forward to like continuing the interaction and the great efforts of all the people that are now part of the community. I think that it's really great.
Hey, I'm Russ Poldrack, faculty at Stanford. been doing fMRI for longer than I wish to admit, and have been sharing data for about a decade now. And BIDS kind of grew out of some of our early work in trying to come up with formats to share data to make it useful for people. When Chris Gorgolewski joined my lab 5 years ago, he kind of pushed it from the old kind of hack together standard to something that was really a community effort. And so I'm here mostly as a historian, I think.
Amazing. And my name is Kirsty. I'm in my colleague Christine's shared office, so that's going to be super confusing for everyone who mixes up my name. I got involved because I mentored a fantastic undergraduate student at the time, Patrick Park, as a Google Summer of Code scholar, and we sort of built and extended the starter kit. So we wanted to sort of try and provide ways of getting involved in BIDS and ways of using BIDS that didn't involve reading like this pretty dry piece of documentation, which is the standard itself. And so we focused on building up that GitHub repository and the wiki there to sort of explain some jargon and think about how we could help people sort of get started, get their toehold with using BIDS across lots of different modalities. I'm also involved because I work, I co-lead the BEPO 01, which is the very first BIDS extension, which we've been working on for quite a few years now, and it's still got work to do, which is extending BIDS to work better for quantitative structural MRI data. It sort of brings us into contact with some really interesting aspects that come from the ISMRM, the International Society for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine community. And for example, the definition of raw, the definition of derived, where those different things fit and where you draw the lines between them. So those are our introductions. I think we have, there's a way to ask questions as attendees on the webinar. You can navigate to the bottom of the screen and you should be able to see a Q&A box, or it's at the bottom of the screen for me. And that allows you to ask us any questions. Everyone can see those questions. Just to be really clear, those of us who are panelists, like who are speaking, we can't see any of you. So the questions or the chat are the only way that we can actually get any input from you, including maybe some feedback on that being somewhat difficult. But we wanted to try and make this a place where you're able to contribute as well. So please put those questions in. I guess I'll give it just one more minute just to see if any appear. Otherwise, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is to talk about communication and communication strategies within BIDS. So you'll have an opportunity to ask questions about those as well. I can see two that are both about ASL BIDS, and I think I'll put those a little bit further on into the webinar. I hope that's okay. So I don't see any questions coming in. I sort of did for a little bit there. Robert, maybe do you want to tell us a little bit about the changes that have already happened as part of the website, the BIDS website, and kind of how that relates to some communication strategies?
Yeah, sure. So we've identified that so the BIDS community is a very vibrant community, but which also means that there's many small groups that don't necessarily meet that often. And what we've identified is that with BIDS we don't really have one common place to meet. GitHub is definitely a place where a lot of meetings happen. And Neurostars is a place where meetings where people meet or discuss. The BIDS discussion Google group is a place where stuff happens, but we have a lot of documents that are being developed in Google Docs, which after some time become difficult to find. So what we've identified as a steering group is that we have multiple channels, and that it would help the community to find each other if we link these channels more strongly together. That's where we have started work on improving the bids.neuroimaging.io website. So one of the things that you might already see is that it now consists of multiple pages with a menu at the top. This should accommodate like a more elaborate hierarchical structure of documents there. It's not necessarily that, it's not that the website is going to be the place where you have the discussions, but the website is the place where, through which you can navigate to the place where the action actually happens. I think it's also important to say that as a steering group, we are not responsible for doing the work. We're trying to identify the work that needs to be done, because we might have a slightly better overview than a lot of people in the community. But we still want the community to take the active role that they have been taking over the years. BIDS is a community effort, so also for the BIDS website, like for improving the communication and for consolidating multiple channels of communication, we really need your help. So I've taken this first step in making a new technical website. Now we need your help in improving the website further.
And one of the reasons that we used, that we moved from using raw HTML and CSS to a Jekyll-based website, which is what Robert did, is that it's hopefully much easier to update, to add things to. We hope that there's less of a technical barrier to do that. Do any of the other panelists, do any of the other steering group members want to talk about sort of their experiences with communications within BIDS?
Maybe I can just quickly say, so coming more from the clinical side or having more the clinical users, a lot of the pet users are not so technical. I would say there's definitely a majority of discussion going on the Google Docs or via email, either via some Google groups or directly via comments in the BEP extension. So that might be interesting also to hear from the users and get a little bit of feedback, just to see what do you use, how do you communicate with the other people on BIDS, what are you missing in order to communicate.
Yeah, thank you so much, and that's really great. Does anyone want to describe, would anyone please describe Neurostars? I think Neurostars is an important, but probably my guess is underused resource.
Yeah, I can say something about that. So this is it's basically kind of like a question and answer website that it's actually run by INCF, the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility. And lots of different, it's meant to basically be kind of a support discussion facility for lots of different groups. We use it for a number of our projects, and it's nice because it's open, it's relatively easy to use, and I think it pretty nicely exposes lots of information. I don't have a feel for how much, like what particular BIDS discussions are going on there, because I mostly watch the Open Neuro and fMRI prep discussions. Maybe somebody else, I don't know if others have ideas about that.
I think the thing that I would really love to hear from folks in the community about Neurostars is I think it's a really, really fantastic space for questions and answers. So sort of Stack Overflow, folks who used to Stack Overflow. It's an amazing space. It means that people who are developers of software, for example, are not answering the same question over and over again. But I think the problem is that, and this is a guess, and I would like to know from the community, that it maybe feels a little vulnerable to ask your quote-unquote stupid question, or to ask your sort of very open-ended question in a very public space. So Neurostars is built on top of Discourse. It's designed for traceable, friendly communications that can be searched, that can be reused. So it's a really great platform, sort of in theory. And I'm really curious to know what folks would need for us to sort of converge more around that. Does it work for things like developing up extensions? How does that relate to using things like GitHub issues? I think the movement from the mailing list is probably good in the sense that the mailing list we go through periods of being very fiery. But also the notifications on GitHub are really intense. And so probably there's not as many people who are following all of the different parts of the development. Yuma, did you have any thoughts about how you engage with comms?
Yeah, I have to admit that I just discovered Neurostars like last week or two ago when you talk about this. So I didn't even know it before. I just went through the mailing list and have it on GitHub, but I'm also not very expert on GitHub, so I just read what I need.
Yeah. So I'm gonna pause and see if there are any comments, or use the Q&A to make a comment. Like, it's totally fine. This is a space where it's okay for you to make a comment rather than a question, folks out there. So please use that if you want to add anything about communications, any questions or any sort of suggestions on that. While I'm waiting for those questions to come in, I'll just sort of say that I want to riff off of Robert's point that it's not our goal as steering group members to control and make sort of, I think we can have oversight, and I think we can help to sort of have, as Russ was saying, some historic kind of background on how BIDS has interacted in the past. But really making sure that we're kind of finding pathways either for people who are here, who are already in the community, to be able to contribute and have your thoughts incorporated into how we communicate would be really, really great. But also pathways for how new people get involved, because we have a list here of channels. So you have to watch, to get all of the information, you have to watch the GitHub specification and the GitHub website repositories. There's a mailing list that is used sporadically now. There's Neurostars. There are lots of different Google Docs all over different places. There's a Twitter account. The individual extensions for BIDS all have their own little groups and ways of communicating. And there's probably others that we didn't come up with. So I don't think we're going to end up saying that there's one size that fits all, but I think I hope we'll be able to find kind of pathways that allow us to link those up a little bit better. We've got a comment. Shall I read out the comment? So thank you, Henke. I'd like to believe that, one, it can be confusing and time-consuming to have multiple discussion platforms rather than a single location. And two, Google Docs still seems low threshold to get all disciplines to join the development of the standard. So that's sort of arguing kind of for the accessibility, that kind of ramping up that Melanie was talking about, of being able to start to build at least maybe prototype in Google Docs. Thank you for sharing.
Can I comment on Henk's question? I agree that it can be confusing and time-consuming to have multiple discussion platforms, but I do think that we have multiple stakeholders within the community, and the different platforms do serve the needs of the different stakeholders. I think that for the people that are developing extensions to the standard, the Google Docs and especially the GitHub system is very valuable, because it keeps a lot of structure and it keeps the discussion clean without recurring discussions. Whereas for people that are not developing but are actually relying on the standard and that are using it in their daily work, I do believe that Neurostars and/or the BIDS discussion email list are the appropriate channels. I think we should also clarify that for someone to be part of the community doesn't mean that you have to follow all the channels. It's a channel for everyone, and we should try to have the channels sufficiently overlap. Like, I'm following multiple channels, but I think we should also encourage people to go to the right channel for the right thing.
And at least know about the existence of the different channels. And I just want to add in another thing, which is, so we have 10 people who are following along on this webinar. Thank you so much for being here. But there's a lot of people who are not here. And I think that one of the key things with the communication, the plurality of the communication channels, is I think there are a lot of voices of people who would really value BIDS that we don't hear from very often. So I wonder, as an ask for the folks who are listening, if you can go back your communities, and just to ask them like what they would prefer and what their sort of barriers for how they learn about things happening in BIDS, what they would most like. It would be brilliant if you could represent those messages back. That'd be great. We got another question, which is not on. Oh, sorry. Actually, I'll just vocalize Chris's suggestion of perhaps BEPS could list current active communication channels for working on that BEP. So on Google Docs, a subsection on specification PRs in the first post. So actually, one of the things that we could do that addresses Robert's vision is that if you want to contribute to a particular extension, you find out how that extension is doing most of its communication. So rather than us telling you what to do, we actually just check that it's easy to find out how you get involved in those communications. I think that's a really nice idea. We had a question though about BIDS derivatives, so I'm going to throw to Russ, who can take us forward.
Sure, yeah. So, BIDS derivatives is an extension proposal that's been in the works for a couple of years at least now, and it's it's kind of challenging to know where you stop when you're trying to describe all the things that could be created from imaging data, and so in addition, we went through a transition from Chris Garlewski to now Chris Markovich is the person who's kind of leading that extension. It's very close. So, it's my understanding is that it's very close to being basically made available for final public comments. And so the hope is that, within, I would guess, a month, maybe Chris Markovich could say in the comments, whether that month time frame is reasonable. But I think it's actually very close to being something that's going to be made available for final public comment and then hopefully pushed very soon. Because I agree that this is really the next step, in kind of making BIDS useful for the world. Robert, you have something to add?
I was just preparing an answer to another question, so nothing to add at this moment.
Maybe we can just mention that Chris Markovich is actually in charge of it just answered, but to us, and I'm not sure if all attendees can see that. Yeah, less than a month.
And how would people comment on that if they wanted to come in and like throw off everything because they didn't know about the communication channels? Where would they would go? I think to a pull request. Is that right? If they wanted to see what that work looks like right now.
That is my understanding.
No, actually, what we have done with BIDS derivatives is that we have the common derivatives, and we have the derivatives including the imaging, and those are now two separate branches on the GitHub BIDS standard repository, which can also be read online already on the read the documents specification. So that's actually relevant to know that if you go to BIDS specification .readthedocs.org, in the lower right corner there is a way of switching to other branches, and that's where you can switch to the common derivatives. What you then see is that the background color changes from blue to red. There's a large draft on the background, but that already gives you a way of reading the proposed extension in a more convenient format, and also comparing, makes it easy to compare how does it fit into the larger picture. So I really recommend people to look at the branches that are on development, also on the Read the Docs website where we host the specification.
Yeah, and I think Chris has added the PR and that link that Robert just described, so that you can read it. You don't have to read the raw version. You can go and check those out. We'd love for you to feedback on those. That'd that'd be really great. Thank you. Does anyone have anything else that they want to? I'm going to take just a moment, just in case anyone wants to add us a Q&A on just anything about BIDS derivatives from attendees. So thanks, Russ, for going over that. Just give it a minute, just in case.
I think Henk replied.
Sorry, I missed that. Sorry, Guma.
Yes, I think Henk replied to the question and answer. I agree. Yeah, perhaps also a monthly newsletter, very brief or compressed. Reaching BIDS by Google search is not difficult, but getting people to know what's happened seems it can use a bit more effort. Perhaps a session on conferences as well as ESMRM.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much for reading that out. I think that's a really fantastic contribution. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we have recently started on the website to have a new section, which we've now used a few times, and I'm pretty sure that that's going to develop further. And we can also start thinking about how we are also going to communicate these news items.
We are also having the blog post, like we're developing a kind of blog from the steering group where we're also trying to communicate kind of more going ons on a regular basis. So we're trying to have something that's more condensed, but that you can basically find out about through the website. So you have kind of an entry point and then branch out.
Yeah. So we have a lovely blog post that introduces us all. You can go and find out a little bit more about us on the new website. Actually, let's do. We had a Google form where we asked for questions. So you're answering questions if you're here live. Thank you so much. But we also had a Google form where people could ask questions, and we actually only got one question, but it was a very detailed question. And I wonder, Melanie, would you mind? You could sort of. I don't know if you're going to read out the whole question, but you might be able to sort of summarize it and share it with the community.
Sure, I'll do that. So basically, we got a little bit of question from the clinical side. So I'll just read parts of the question. It was about deep brain stimulation, ECOG, SEEG, and MR guided focused ultrasound. All of them require neuroimaging, and typically a preoperative MRI and postoperative CT are also co-registered to then scans where you have, or other modalities where you have derived electrode positions. So part of this is already taken care of in the IHE BIDS specification, but the question was also here on the one hand, if you have these other modalities, how would you represent a raw data storage solution? That was one part of the question. And the other part of the question was also that CT use is currently not defined in BIDS. And that's something like perfusion CT, especially here in the hospital, is, I completely agree, so prevalent with regards to use. So the question is there a CT extension? Is there someone who wants to work on this? And also, is there a BIDS clinical committee? And just answering some of these questions, well, I guess for the IEG part, I'll take it over to Robert, but just quickly for the CT, I checked the extension list, and yes, there is currently, when I just looked through the list that Franklin said, there's currently no CT list. I think if there's I know some people that are actively working with CT research. It's a lot used when you do stroke, but it's also used for other body parts, for example, for the knee, for the back. So I think if we could reach out to those research communities that actually use it, that could benefit from standardization, we could introduce another bed. But again, it needs to come from the communities that actually are interested in having data standardization for that format. And regarding a clinical committee, I think it would be so great if we could get interest from clinicians that could advise on the clinical use of BIDS. So we're super open to get input on that side.
Okay, so from the perspective of the intracranial EEG, I think so. With the intracranial EEG, it's definitely the case that there's patient data. The patient data often tends to be more complex because it's not always as clearly planned. It's more individualized. That makes describing patient data more difficult. It's important that we have BIDS examples. which is also a GitHub repository, and we try to make examples without actual data in there to demonstrate how you could organize data sets. And I think that has been very effective in discussing extensions to the standard. So that's what we use for extending it with MEG, with EEG, and also with intracranial EEG. And I hope that we can get more examples for data sets, both with full data, for example, shared on OpenNeuro, but also like smaller examples where the data sets, where the data files themselves have actually been like scrubbed from any data, so as not to release any identifying information. But I also think that we need to develop more documentation and guidelines, which are not part of the standard, because I think the standard allows us to do more than what some people are now aware of. And the standard itself, I think, should just remain like a dry text. It doesn't have to elaborate on all sorts of different examples. So I think that the ArtoKit is really a very valuable asset that needs further contributions from the community, so that we have more examples and more Q&A type of contributions to the starter kit for people to learn from.
And sorry, I just have a small addition to this and correction before. So what I just saw, that we have two ways of having the BEP extensions. One is if you enter through the website, there's a list, but then we have this internal document also that Franklin keeps. And actually all the way in the bottom, I can see they are starting a CT extension. So if you want to get involved, I think maybe write either Franklin or one of us, and we can share the name of the person that is trying to get, because it says need more contributors. So go ahead and get involved with that.
Yeah. And whilst we're staying on a theme of extending into different domains, different types of imaging, we had a couple of questions on ASL, and I think, Robert, are you able to address those? Or at least share them?
Yes. Yeah, so Hink asked the question, any development on or guidelines how to go from DICOM to BIDS? For example, has there been any progress on ASL, and would be wondering if this is interesting to generalize. I think this is a question that primarily relates to tooling more than to the development of the standard. Although I'm not 100% sure about whether the standard needs further improvements or what type of improvements the standard needs for ASL. But I think the conversion from DICOM to BIDS, that falls much more in the category of tooling. And I'm aware of a lot of different groups developing their own in-house tools that they're starting to share now, also starting to share with documentation. Here at the Donders, we have the BIDS Coiner. I know that HeudiConf is a very widely used converter. For MEG and for EEG data, again, we have different converters. I think that's where hopefully we would have like generic converters, but I can also really imagine that within specific domains that we have domain-specific converters, because it's going to be very, as we already realized with the BIDS validator, it's very difficult to keep the BIDS validator up to date to all the extensions. And that's what I also expect with converters. And it's much easier to make I think it's much more manageable to conceive of an DICOM ALS to BIDS converter than to think of one that also does intracranial EEG and CTs. But it's really something where I hope that we can get more convergence in the community and people working together and also using each other's tools, because a lot of these tools already exist.
Hey guys, sorry to jump in. I have to run off, so I will see you all at the next meeting. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, Roz. Thanks so much.
All right, bye-bye.
There is, thank you, and thank you, Robert, for going over that question. Thank you, Hank, for sending it in. It's super interesting, and I feel I have like lots of ideas for blog posts. Like I have lots of ideas for sort of, I think probably one of the parts of documentation that would be really helpful is quite a bit about sort of like BIDS philosophy and like what does it mean to have a BIDS compliant data set? Like, what does that mean from different angles? What does that mean for kind of people who use other types of data and things like that? So anyone who, you know, fancies on contributing that based on their previous experience, that'd be really, really great. There was a question, I'm just going to verbalize this from Maria, and then Chris Markowitz has replied already from the chat of, do you know any BIDS extension where you can specify where to include data set labeling to apply supervised training? And what Chris has answered is that he thinks that it can probably already be done in BIDS, and a specific question, that's a great question for Neurostars. So my guess is that it would probably be something that can fit in the participants, or there's ways of adding lots of sort of phenotypic information, there's sort of different spaces that can add in around the imaging data, the brain imaging data. And so you can quite often like hack, it's not really hack, it's like designed that way to hold the information that you particularly need. And so I think if you can do exactly what Chris has offered, which is just open up a question with as specific an example of the use case that you can. It's okay if it's not, you know, totally perfect. And then we can kind of work through that. And then what's really great is because it's on Neurostars, that question will stay available and people will be able to add to it. It's also possibly something that once the question is answered, it could go in maybe the BIDS starter kit so that we can link. So people who are coming from a machine learning point of view might realize how they can also benefit from BIDS, I think. We have about sort of 15 minutes left. And so I just want to sort of take a moment again to let any of you who are watching just write in any questions. So I'm sort of gonna like fill space, maybe I'll sing a song, just until a couple of questions come in. So this does not need to be related to anything that we've talked about so far. It can be something that you're particularly interested in, or something that you would like to advertise, so something that you would like to share, that you'd like to let people know about or recommend. I'm not actually going to sing a song or do a dance. That would be deeply insulting to the rest of you. Sorry, I'm not going to do that. We have another webinar coming up on
about
Thursday, which is, go for it. Yeah, read out.
What's the best way to recruit help with modulating and pushing an station forward? I need help with the MRS specification as I'm still a full-time student. And the second, what's the best way to see the changes to BIDS specification over time in order to facilitate updating a stall extension?
Can I do the second one while sort of folks think about an answer? Because the second one I think is a little bit more sort of technical. It's like part of why moving to GitHub is very good, because that's, you know, sort of the goal of GitHub is to do this sort of version control. So I think if you currently have a Google Doc, unfortunately, there have been a lot of changes because there's quite a lot of additional text in the BIDS extension. Probably the easiest thing to do is find the very specific sections that you're planning to update, and you can probably strip away the things that your extension doesn't matter on. So my recommendation would be to either convert to GitHub, which is what Beppo one and Gilles de Hollander and I have done, where we have like a sort of copy of the BIDS specification, and that's where we make changes and where we do pull requests, and we work within GitHub for that. Or I would say just strip down your extension to only focus on very specific sections that you either want to add or to change, and try not to change the other parts. If you want to change the other parts because you find like a typo or because you think that some of the wording could be clearer, you can actually submit those as pull requests outside of it being an extension. So you can fix typos, you can fix unclear phrasings. That doesn't need to be all of the changing that goes with I don't know what MRS is. Is it magnetic resonance spectroscopy? Is that what I'm guessing that's the topic? So you don't have to put all of the changes in all in one go if you're finding things, but otherwise if it's in key sections, then just change those sorts of sections. That would be my recommendation on the sort of technical part. Does anyone want to suggest sort of the more like social and collaborative challenges of project managing an extension forward? Everybody's very busy.
Maybe I can just add to the Google Doc version. So maybe one thing that I would say, as you are writing an extension, or at least now coming from the PET side, what I can say is, yes, the issue with the Google Doc is that it's not traced and that you get the same questions over and over again every time you ask the people or another person to look at it, and they will add the same question. But I think especially as you're trying to even establish a consensus of what is necessary for PET, this is quite complicated. I assume for MRS it would be too. Actually, the Google Doc has been okay to get a draft, but now where we have arrived at something where we have example data sets, we're actually planning to do a pull request and to go to move over to GitHub to have then track changes. So I guess it really depends on the state of your extension.
Oh, Melanie, you just accidentally muted.
Yeah,
there you go.
done. Yeah. No, so
okay,
yeah.
You said that you were going to you said that I think you were going to say something along the lines of Google Docs for sort of prototyping at the very near the beginning, get to a point where you have some examples, and then maybe move over to GitHub for kind of refining the detail. Yeah, I actually want to say, just based off of, I totally agree with your point, and I also think examples are by far the most sort of engaging way into the extension. So, listen, if you have some ideas and you can start to reach out to people who have MRS data, and you can help them put it into the format that you've come up with, you will find in that process lots and lots of little extra sort of things. And you may also find that those people feel more confident contributing to BIDS, because contributing to BIDS feels very big and very overwhelming, whereas specifically changing the text so that it fits your data, maybe that's a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, I think that also working on the examples, that's also what we experience with the MEG and with the EG extension. It's like any format with which you can, with a small group, work on an example data set. It can be a shared Google Drive or a shared Dropbox. It doesn't have to be real data, it just needs to have the structure of the data. That makes it much more accessible for people to actually see what the consequences would be. You can just open the sidecar files in a text editor. And that has worked very well for us. I think the step to GitHub, to the BIDS examples, that's in the same way as like the Google Doc is very accessible. Making a pull request, that requires more understanding of how GitHub works. So I would be careful with making that step too early, because then you might actually lose the people with whom you want to reach the consensus on the extension. And I think it's also very important to realize that there's each of us also has, so we're all together in BIDS, but each of us also has their own like specific neuroscience and neuroimaging community that we relate to. So I have no idea what type of software is being used in the MRS community, but I can imagine there being like a mailing list or even multiple mailing lists, conferences where this is specifically being discussed. So I think it's also important to actually reach out to the domain-specific communities to make BIDS more known. Probably it's already, I would expect it already to be known to some extent, to try to get people to bridge from a domain-specific community to the more general BIDS community.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to verbalize a comment that Elizabeth has sent, linking out to an issue that Jarek opened about updating the BET guidelines. It links into some of the things that I was saying about the fact that not everything needs to come in all in one go. So, for example, some of the kind of, if you're going to change some of the common principles of BIDS or add in things in a slightly different, outside of something that's very domain specific, it's probably better to have multiple small contributions where there's more eyes on the proposed changes. So BEPO 01 that has been worked on for a really long time, and actually there are quite a lot of clashes that we've had in developing this. And so there's quite a lot of things that we've ended up having to kind of recommend changes against for the BIDS specification, maybe for the specific wording. And so what Jarek is proposing is that having smaller contributions coming in is actually much more reviewable, it's much easier to understand within the community, and it's easier to get more engagement in. The one thing that I'll just say on top of that is that there is a history in some of the extensions, with BEPO 01 being very specifically one of them. I was going to try and anonymize that, where some of the conversations have been so impassioned that they actually really put people off, and so we lose contributors, not because of the technology, but because of the style of discourse. So that's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, is like respectful and kind of giving people space to communicate in the way that they most prefer. So where I'm at with BEPO 01 is that I think that we need to make sure that all of our ideas are logically consistent first. And I think it's important that we have our own space to get those together. But I really like this idea of once they are logically consistent, we can try and sort of put them in a staged way rather than having something gigantic come across. But those are different. Those are like my particular ways of working and sort of others within the community. And I think the reason that we wanted to kind of have these webinars, have these discussions, was to allow people to think and maybe formalize a little bit more what types and ways of communication are going to work best for different people in the community. So that link is in the chat. Also, just on a related point, Henke has also shared a comment about perhaps it's good to clarify the history of BIDS, which is primarily from the functional brain imaging perspective, whereas brain imaging as well as BIDS can be used for something more than functional. And that is some of the tension that there was and was sort of, Russ has already gone, but BIDS grew out of sharing functional MRI data. And so there are some tensions around sharing data that is not functional MRI. There are some aspects that are baked into the specification. I think I hope everybody is really, really committed to moving BIDS forward to be inclusive of as many modalities as possible. So if you see wording or phrasing that is actually exclusive of your particular modality or isn't clear how it would map to your modality or your use case, that's a really great way of changing it, because if the goal is just to make it a little bit more broader and more accessible, then we can change that. What we can't change is the actual specification. That takes us into BIDS 2.0. So if there is a sort of general rule of not accepting any changes to the specification that will require, that will break previous versions. So we can extend, but we can't sort of pull away from data sets that already exist. That's like a guiding principle of BIDS. I think there are a few people in the community who are very hungry to work on BIDS 2.0, to work on another major release that does have breaking changes in it. And that's a conversation that we can all definitely have, for sure. We only have 5 minutes left. So folks on the call, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to share? And folks at home, if you want to type anything in. Henk has just commented, what's the correct time frame for creating BIDS 2.0? If it's too past, would it confuse and stall the uptake of BIDS? I really don't think anybody has an answer to what that time frame for 2.0 is. I think everyone probably has different thoughts about it. And I think certainly moving too quickly on 2.0, I think probably will cause more confusion. So I think those 2 points are very true, but at the same time, if we get to a point, which I think members of the community would argue we are, where we're hampered by BIDS 1.0, then maybe there's just a little bit of confidence in stepping into the great unknown. But that's a much longer conversation, and it's really important that we have as many people involved in it as possible.
Could we maybe before we go off from the people attending here, what kind of specifications are you contributing to, so we get kind of idea how much of who do we have represented here? Like, do we have different specifications here, or mostly MR?
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. If you could comment either in the Q&A or just in the chat, the type of data that you use BIDS for, that'd be really wonderful. I want to, while you're commenting, I want to just shout out a silent lurker on this call, which is Franklin Feingold. He is a project manager for Open Neuro and also does a lot of project management and maintenance for BIDS. He has been corralling us, coordinating us, chairing our meetings, taking minutes, sending us around agendas, organizing all of these different things. I just want to make sure that we say thank you so much to you, Franklin, for all of this amazing hard work. So thank you very much. You can't see him, but he is here, and thank you very much. We've got in the answers, we've got task fMRI, we've got MRS and megapress. I also don't know what megapress is, but that sounds very exciting. We've got functional and structural MRI, derivatives, stats models, and the execution depth. And we've also got someone who works on diffusion and MRI, but it's difficult to integrate with MRS.
So for example, as you can see in the list of extensions that Franklin has compiled, we have everything from genetic to DICOM metadata to CT. There's a very broad community out there. And again, it's more the MR community that has been, of course, mostly involved in this. So I think that's why we've been thinking a lot about communication in order to reach out to the different communities.
Yeah, I have 14:59 on my clock, and everyone always likes it when meetings finish on time. I'm sure everybody who's watching along has lots of places and lots of pieces of work to do. Please let us know. The best person to probably email, if email is your favorite, would be Franklin. I think the email address is on the Eventbrite. I think it will also be on the BIDS website for ways to get in touch with Franklin. If you have bigger questions that you think would benefit from community contributions, then I would really, really love for you to head over to Neurostars. It's very easy to make an account, and you can share your thoughts there. And tell your friends about the slightly later time zone version of this call, which is going to be on Thursday of this week. I can't remember the time. Does anyone could anyone shout out the time?
It depends on the time frame.
Yeah. So I think it's 8 p.m. for me. So I think it's around about like it's either 11 or 12 on the west coast of the US. But go look at the Eventbrite, check out the website for how to find the links, and let us know what we can sort of focus on that would best serve you. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you being here. Take care.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.